Friends, Dave Paulides, CanAm Missing Project, copyrighted edition for our video channel. Thanks for being here. And this is a missing person segment, but it's going to be the unusual. We're going to cover 3 cases today, and the first one has to do with a Louisiana County Deputy Sheriff who disappears. I've never heard of such a thing. And we're going to get into that in a second. But first, as many of you who follow me know, I was in Washington last month regarding a conference at the Quinault Resort and Casino in Ocean Shores, Washington. It was a great event. I knew I was going, and Angie and I got there a little early and took a trip up to Olympic National Park, entered in via the west side, and went up near Lake Quinault. Lake Quinault sits just on the west side of the park, kind of near the ocean. It's an absolutely gorgeous setting. There's an old lodge that sits on the water. Angie and I went in there for lunch and then drove back into the park and took a hike on one of the trails where 2 people are missing that I'm looking for. Spooky place. Spooky, spooky place. That's all I can tell you. It's almost like a rainforest in there. Absolutely pristinely gorgeous, but spooky. That's all I can tell you. So I like to do research on a location before I actually go. And this story came up, and I like to tell you these things because when you go into the woods, I want you to know that the woods are not what you may think they are. So this is an article from 2018, weather.com, February 8th, 2018. Meteorological mystery surrounds what caused massive tree fall in northwest Washington. A meteorologist in northwest Washington is trying to solve a meteorology mystery surrounding a massive tree fall in Olympic Park. More than 100 trees fell in an area on the north side of Lake Quinault on the Olympic Peninsula just after midnight on January 27th. Cliff Mass, a Seattle meteorologist and professor of atmospheric sciences at the University of Washington, is trying to figure out why. According to a 2-part post he wrote in his blog, early reports seem to indicate that a microburst was responsible for the tree fall. Mass became skeptical that winds from a microburst would be sufficient to topple the large trees, particularly since some fell while others were snapped at the base of the tree. Folks, these are big trees, old school trees. Spoke to Logan Johnson, meteorologist in charge of NWS Seattle office. Mass wrote, he suggested that to snap off such big trees would take at least 70, 80 miles per hour winds, maybe more. Mass noted at the time that the tree fall occurred, radar indicated that there was no hint of instability or thunderstorms, end of quote. Typical during episodes of microbursts, defined by the National Weather Service as a localized column of sinking air, a downdraft, within a thunderstorm and is usually less than equal to 2.5 times in diameter. Microbursts can cause extensive damage at the surface and in some instances can be life-threatening. Okay. Interestingly, the tree fall was picked up as a seismic activity, helping to confirm the timing. At 1:26 a.m. that morning, there was a lot of activity. No tremors were noted at the regional stations. Dr. John Vidal, a former seismologist at Washington State, suggested it may represent the tremor produced by huge trees falling. More evidence of the timing. Now, by the News Tribune in Washington on February 19th, mysterious wind may have felled more than 100 old-growth trees near Lake Quinault. It came in the night, snapping trees like chopsticks. Early on January 27th, 100 gigantic old-growth trees fell on the north shore of Lake Quinault. The resulting thud at 1:30 a.m. was strong enough to register as a small earthquake, according to seismic monitors at Quinault. Fallen trees, they splintered trunks left pointing in the air, blocked North Shore roads, and damaged utility lines along a 1,000-foot stretch. Officials from the Olympic National Park knew that some sort of wind event was the culprit, but nearby weather stations reported only light breeze that night. Radars didn't show any thunderstorms or big storms in the area. Yeah, I find that highly, highly strange. Now, there's a lot of things that are strange in our outdoors. I think I've told you before that I've asked you to watch the documentary Night of the Grizzly. Here in Glacier National Park, one night, decades ago, there were 2 attacks in the middle of the night on campers, like 15 miles apart from each other, by different grizzly bears that killed both parties. You talk about rare. It's highly rare that you get a grizzly attacking a camper in the middle of the night and killing them. But 2 in one night, unbelievably rare. Unbelievably. Not even the same bear. So, Night of the Grizzly, it's an interesting documentary. You should watch it. I think it's on YouTube right now. And then there's also been the normal strangeness that happens out there all the time. But what I'm trying to tell you is that our world is not as you may think it is. Allowing children to walk around in a U.S. national forest without your eyes on them all the time, unthinkable. Don't do it. We're coming up on hiking season. Do not ever leave your kids out of your sight. Ever, never, ever. So, let's get going. The first story involves a deputy sheriff missing from Wynne County, Louisiana. His name was JC Krippin. Crippen was 58 years old. He was the deputy chief. That's the number 2 man in charge of the sheriff's department. There's the sheriff, then there's the deputy chief. Sometimes he's called the chief. Sometimes he's called the undersheriff. But he was a resident of Winfield, Louisiana, and the number 2 man in charge of Wynne County. The sheriff of the county at the time was a man named Jordan. Sheriff Jordan stated that JC was his right-hand man. Absolutely 100% trustworthy, very conscientious, and he was working several burglaries when he disappeared March 25th, 1971. Jordan couldn't be more assertive when he said that highly trusted, would never do anything flaky. I know exactly the man he's talking about. I've worked around him. March 25th at 10:45 a.m., Crippen walked into the lieutenant who's in charge of auto theft, and talked to him. At the time he got a call, he took some notes, got some files out of his office, and then left and got into his car, his unmarked car. And when he got into the car at 10:50 a.m., he checked in with communications saying, hey, I'm going to be in my car for a while, so if you need me, get me here. It's the last time anybody heard from him. At 1:27 a.m., after a massive search by every police car in that part of the state, his car is found in downtown Monroe, Louisiana. The car is unlocked. It's at the corner of 4th and Washington. Keys are in the ignition. And the sheriff stated there is no way in the world that Crippen would do that. Not a chance. Well, they're searching for him. Family searching for him. Police department, everyone. They got the FBI involved. They posted a $10,000 reward for a safe return. And then the sheriff on March 31st hired a criminalist from Shreveport, Louisiana to assist. They had already searched his white Pontiac that was impounded, that belonged to the sheriff's office. Nothing unusual in it. He was seen earlier in the day that he disappeared driving with 2 people in his car. Again, when you're a detective, you're always doing that kind of stuff, so it's not unusual. But they were trying to figure out what kind of case he was working on. The first thing that comes to every law enforcement mind when something like this happens is that he was kidnapped and killed. Krippin wasn't married. He had 4 kids. He was real tight with his kids. And the sheriff knew that this was completely out of character. So the FBI and the sheriff and every police department in that part of the state is looking and has his photo everywhere. This made huge news. April 8th, no new leads, major item in the news. The person that Krippin was seen with, they tried to do a composite sketch. They thought it might have been kidnapping. They were at a dead end. Another month and a half, 2 months later, May 30th, the sheriff receives a call from Krippin's son, Jimmy. Jimmy tells the sheriff, who's a family friend, that his dad had returned home. Turns out that Krippin called the house the prior Sunday morning at 7 a.m., said he wanted to come home, but he didn't know how to get to Winfield, Louisiana, which was his home. He stated that for the last 17 days he had been working at a gas station in Pensacola and had been working under the name of Josh Allen. Sheriff stated that just happened to be the name of a suspect he arrested the week before he disappeared. Family told him to take a bus from Pensacola to New Orleans and they'd be there to pick him up. So he arrived with no ID, no knowledge about how long he'd been missing, and told his family at 4 a.m. that Sunday that he called them at 7 a.m. he started having memories and recollections of his past. And he remembered the phone number of his son. Sons met him in New Orleans, drove him home. Let's talk about this for a second. This is Monroe, Louisiana. He says he was in Pensacola. It's about 360 miles of driving, essentially about 5.5 hours of driving to get from point to point. What I found very interesting about this, it's another incident where somebody disappears and is found in Florida. Now it turns out that the sheriff did send somebody to Pensacola to that gas station, and they said, yeah, Josh Allen worked here for me for 17 days. He's a great worker. Nothing unusual. Just said he was hard on luck and needed a job. Just showed up at my door. Nowadays, you're supposed to have ID, a social security number, etc. But none of that played a role in this. Probably was paying him cash for all they know. Now, another thing that's interesting to me is he said he woke up at 4 a.m. and started to have memories. It's almost as though the people that have a dream about somebody have those dreams at about that time in the morning when they're sleeping. So Krippin got home. He'd been a deputy for 15 years. Never had any issues. Never had anything like this ever happen. Everyone was completely befuddled. Well, the department and his family agreed that he needed to go to the hospital. And he went to Baton Rouge Hospital from June 7th to June 15th. Stayed there for a week and had a battery of tests done to him. During the time he was missing, he lost a significant amount of weight. And during the time back in the hospital, they said he slowly started to gain his weight back. During a press release, they said that he had no memory of those 2 months other than what he had about being at the gas station. No idea how he got to Pensacola. No idea how he left his car with the keys in the ignition in Louisiana. It's just all a blur. So after a week of being in the hospital and going through tests and then deeming he was healthy again, the sheriff obviously had to have access to those medical records if they were going to take him back to make sure he was stable. And the sheriff took him back. On July 1st, he came back to work. And I did a lengthy search both ways. I didn't find any other notations of Crippen ever having problems before or again. But I think this is a fascinating case. Number one, it brings in another type of person with amnesia. I mean, we talked about truckers at length, but now you have someone who's deemed very stable. Somebody who stays in a job 15 years, that's stability. And how he happened to get to Pensacola? The $1,000,000 question. And where did he live? Well, the sheriff sent some men down there, and they did do a workup on him that satisfied his curiosity and his honesty for Crippen and took him back. What else can you say? Now, the next couple of cases are super fascinating to me. First case happened in Florida. Not too far, just a bit north of Pensacola and a bit south of Montgomery, Alabama. Happened November 1st, 1935. The next two cases are going to have the same sort of ending, just so you can kind of start thinking. First case involves a man named A.L. McGowan. November 1st, 35. Now, McGowan lived near a local Reverend, M.F. Harrison. He'd known McGowan for a while. He had traded with him to purchase a large trailer that he and his family could live in, the Reverend and his family. He saw McGowan about 2 weeks before he disappeared. Both McGowan and the Reverend lived in the same cluster community called Cluster Springs, Florida. Families in the area all got along well. There weren't any issues, just a tight-knit community. Well, McGowan disappeared one morning in the community. He was last seen walking around. Nobody knew where he went. Nobody knew where he was. Big searches. Nobody found anything. Searches went on and on for weeks. Everybody got frustrated. Essentially, a big mystery. Then on December 6, 1935, Reverend Harrison woke up that morning, leans over, and he tells his wife, he says, I had a dream that McGowan is in a swamp near our city, dead. And he's in the middle of the swamp. I can't get it out of my mind. Well, it turns out that the Reverend's wife and McGowan's sister were really good friends. The Reverend said that he'd never had a dream like this, and he was uncomfortable telling anybody because he doesn't even know if it's factual. Well, the Reverend's wife tells McGowan's sister, and McGowan's sister calls the sheriff and says, hey, we need to have that swamp out there searched. And the sheriff said, okay, we'll do that. Well, on December 8th, right near the beginning of the day, they find McGowan's body in the middle of that swamp. And they find out that the news essentially came from Reverend Harrison himself in a dream. So the sheriff arrests Reverend Harrison as a material witness and takes him into the station. The coroner comes out and takes possession of McGowan's body, takes him for autopsy. You can kind of see how this would play out. I mean, in a very simplistic world, you'd have to think, well, maybe the Reverend isn't all the good guy you thought he was. Maybe he knows who killed him, or maybe he killed him himself. So the sheriff interviews the Reverend for an entire day. Reverend says, hey, I don't know anything about it. I merely had this dream. I wasn't even sure the dream was right. We were friends. I have no reason to harm the man. I'm a Christian. I would never do anything like that. Near the end of the day, and the end of questioning, the coroner comes into the sheriff's office. And he says, I think you're going to have to release the Reverend. And the sheriff says, why is that? And he goes, because the best I could tell is that McGowan died of natural causes. There were no signs of violence to his body. He has no bruising. Natural causes. Uh-oh. The sheriff tells the Reverend he apologizes, had to do his job, and he releases him into the community. My question, who gave the message to the Reverend? Obviously, he believes in God. He's a Reverend. Did the message come from God? Did the message come from some place else? The soul of McGowan. And then, why didn't whoever told the Reverend, why didn't they just tell McGowan's sister? Many of you have commented in the past that, they never want to tell the wife or the mother of the person because it could be too tragic. So they always tell somebody else. Well, I don't know. Maybe the next case will tell us. Next incident involves a man named Doyle Seanor, 52 years old. Went missing January 4th, 1943. It's another strange one. 20-year Pittsburgh police officer. He retired from the PD July 1942. He was single, no kids. His mother was his only living relative, a woman named Euphemia Bittner, 75 years old, lived in Pittsburgh as well. You know, when somebody works at a police department for 20 years, I always go back in the past, see if there's anything on record about what might have happened to him in a career. Well, it's pretty interesting. August 1919, patrol officer Seanor got a call of a disturbance, drove up to the disturbance, just a single patrolman. He gets attacked and beaten unconscious by two people. Officers show up. They end up arresting and convicting those two people of attempted murder of a police officer. And Seanor was off duty with serious head trauma for 2 months. Now let me tell you, 90% to 95% of all the policemen and sheriffs never have something serious happen to them like this in the field. That's how rare it is, even today. Now, let's go forward 4 years. December 14th, 1923. While on duty, Seanor got into a physical fight with a 61-year-old man. He'd gotten a call that this man was intoxicated, causing a disturbance in his house, and they needed the police. Seanor gets there first, goes in, and he's immediately struck in the face with a whiskey bottle and cuts him all open. If you don't know already, when you get cut in the face, it bleeds a lot. And right here on the side of your neck is your carotid artery. You cut that thing and you don't stop it, you're dead. Within a couple minutes, you're dead. So you got to take those things really seriously. Now, it's also a fight for your life. I don't care what anybody says. You're fighting for your life at this point. Now, he had a baton, and he ended up in the melee hitting this man in the head and knocking him out. Ambulances responded, took both men to the hospital, and the suspect that he hit in the head ended up dying. And there was a coroner's investigation against Doyle to see if the force was justified. And it was, and he was exonerated. But I was thinking, well, those are two super violent attacks on him. Within 4 years, I don't know anybody in the police department that's been attacked that bad. And that's pretty bad. Now, he was married for 10 years, from 1916 to 1926. So he was married during the time that these two attacks went on. So that would have been a lot on a marriage. Now, he left the police department after 20 years after he had a nervous breakdown. Friends, I'm sorry. People handle this sort of violence different ways. Some people, it rolls off their shoulder. Other people, they take it personally, and it starts to ruin them. And once it ruins your marriage, that's hard. It's really hard. But seeing his wife, watching him go through two violent episodes like this, she probably wanted him to take a desk job, and he didn't want to. Well, Doyle disappeared January 4th, 1943. Walked out of his house. He's gone. Nobody knew where to look. Nobody knew where he would go. It was just a complete blank. Well, a month after he disappears, his mom, Euphemia, one night has a dream. She dreams that her son's body is floating down the Ohio River near the Emsworth Dam, right near Pittsburgh. She wakes up that morning, calls some friends of her sons in the police department and says, "Could you please search?" They send a search team down. They search for 3 days. Ohio River's huge. Go through Pittsburgh, it's huge. Finding a body would be a miracle, and they didn't find it. So that wasn't really astounding. But then fast forward a month, March 10th, 1943. Doyle's body is found just downstream from the dam, floating, seen by a fisherman. Police come out and recover the body. It's Doyle's. There was no cause of death listed anywhere for Doyle. Nobody knew what caused his death. Well, what's the difference? The difference this time is that his mom, his closest living relative, the closest person to him in his life, has the dream. The dream leads to the recovery of the body. What can you make of that? Now again, we've talked about this. I've given you a monologue about this. Is that his soul? Is that God? Some of you said if this message came from a psychic, you can't believe it because that would be possibly coming from the devil or a demon. So one thing I've never really quite understood from the people who claim that is, what if the psychic had that dream? And she came forward and told the family. You don't listen to it because that could be a demon? But what makes a mother hearing it different from a psychic hearing it? Just two different people. If the psychic's not doing it for money, then what's the motive other than goodwill? Nearly everybody says, and it's generally believed, that when you die, your soul leaves. And goes on. But those same people never really explain what ghosts are. Are those the soul that's stuck here? But why would it be stuck here? If that soul is stuck here, then why wouldn't they communicate with others to explain what happened? And you hear these ghost shows sometimes, and I don't watch them, but they sometimes say, yeah, this ghost told us how they were killed. So is the ghost that these shows are tracking the soul? A lot of questions in my mind. Not sure if we'll ever really know. But it wears on me why sometimes people hear about where a body's located, and other times it's never said. I don't get it. This is the kindness revelation, folks. We've had bad times. We're going to have worse times in the future. There's no doubt in my mind. But you know what? We can only do things that affect ourselves. We are only in control of ourselves. If you see somebody in distress, why not help them? If you see somebody that needs help that's in a better way than you, why not help them? Why not say something nice? Doesn't hurt. Doesn't cost you anything. Even just a smile at people at the store doesn't cost anything. And you know, your smile may make somebody's day who has very little communication with anyone on the outside. A lot of people stay home alone all day. That smile may make their day. And there's a lot of people right now that have mental illness, that are depressed, that are challenged every day. Every day. I'm not challenged every day, but I'm challenged a lot, folks. Things wear on me. Just like many of you. I'm no different. I'm a nobody. I'm blessed that I have somebody that wants to listen. I get messages all the time about people saying, Dave, thank you for talking about mental health. Remember something. People love you. People care about you. And at this village right here, you can say anything you want. And if anybody demeans you, attacks you, says something horrific about mental illness, they'll be gone. I guarantee it, because I'll take care of it. I want this to be a safe place where we can exchange ideas. That's important. And remember, there's an organization out there called NAMI, N-A-M-I. Costs nothing to go to their classes. Angie and I went to a class for 12 weeks. It was the best class I ever took. There are people experiencing mental illness. There's families with family members experiencing mental illness. And they bring people in who are mentally ill, who will talk to us about the situation. It's enlightening like you wouldn't believe. And if you can't make it to a class, you can take it online. Look into it. Thank you. Paulides out.